conflict management is hugely important. And I hate to say it, it's inevitable. The triggers are scarce resources. People fight over that. Work styles. People have different work styles. When people have different work styles, they grate on each other. It's not that good. You have to improve it. Schedule priorities. That would drive conflict. If you need a resource on a certain day and it doesn't show up, that's going to create some conflict. Now, I can attest from my experience that solid, structured PM practices really do help. They really help. Everything you're learning here really helps with conflict management. Now, successful conflict management does lead to greater productivity and really does improve working relationships because it may be painful to have the conflict, but if you work it through and achieve a win-win situation, you're going to be closer as a result. Differences of opinion can be productive if managed well, and that's key. If you just let it fly and don't control that and try to harness and channel that to a good end, it might not result in a positive benefit. But if you manage differences of opinion well, you're actually going to get a better solution. Now, team members should attempt to resolve conflicts among themselves. And then, if they're unsuccessful, they should then escalate to the PM. That's a key thing. I've been in situations where maybe I didn't handle this as well as I could have. And I've had team members come one after another, complaining about each other. And my answer is always, have you spoken to that person? Take the initiative, do it yourself as a team member, and then escalate to the PM. And as a PM, coach people to do that. Now, with conflict, it's very important to address conflict early, directly. This is important. Collaborate collaboratively. Don't emphasize the conflict when you try to address it. And very important, privately. You make a huge mistake if you call somebody out in public. Say, hey, can I talk to you for a minute? Now, I will highlight that productively confronting the conflict is optimal. Okay, a lot of people are uncomfortable with that. I had a student last semester who would joke because I'd call it the 300-pound gorilla and he'd call it the 800-pound elephant in the room. Hey, either way, it's the thing that nobody's talking about. But you have to deal with it, conflict. And what I always say is treat it like you're a doctor and the conflict is a body on the table. We have to assess how to work it through objectively, just like a doctor would assess helping their patient. Doctors can't get emotional about that, right? They have to objectively analyze the situation. That's productively confronting the conflict. Okay. If resolution cannot be achieved informally, then I hate to say it, formal procedures may be used, including disciplinary action. You hope it never gets to that, but you might have to deal with that at some point. But again, I think the biggest thing here, well, there's two. One is do not address conflict publicly, do it privately. One of the things I'd like to highlight too is one time I went to a conflict management course and I learned the great phrase, when you fill in the blank, I feel fill in the blank. It really takes the edge off because it humanizes, the pain or the conflict itself and how that makes the other person feel. So let's say you say it like this. Let's say somebody's talking over you all the time in a meeting. You take the person aside privately and you say, hey, when you talk over me, I feel that you are not valuing my input. And believe me, a lot of times the person who does it doesn't even realize it. Or even if they do and they're being offensive, it definitely humanizes you and they have to take note of it. It's a very effective way to handle this. Now, the other thing is, again, productively confronting the conflict is very optimal. And again, I just gave you an example. When you fill in the blank, I feel fill in the blank. That's a really great way to confront the conflict in a productive fashion. Now, the factors influencing the application of conflict resolution methods are if a conflict is relatively important and intense, right? Because if it's less important, yeah, you can say, oh, well, don't worry about it. If it's not that intense, well, you're probably going to have an easier time of working it through. Time pressure, because time is never an ally. That's my note, okay? So if you're sitting there and you're having a conflict over something and time is ticking and it's late in the game, for example, on a project, it's going to just increase the conflict because of the stress. The relative power of those involved is very important, right? You have to be careful if you're having a conflict with somebody who's more senior than you. I have to be blunt with you. Okay. The importance of maintaining a good relationship is always there. And what is the motivation to resolve the conflict? I've worked on teams where people are conflicting and they're in conflict and they never want to work it out. There was one team in particular that I worked in for a major primary insurer who didn't want to work well. They were a shared resource and didn't want to work well with my project organization. We eventually replaced them because it was so difficult. We confronted them about it. I actually created a RACI diagram to help, and yeah, and that was my part of it. But senior leadership was trying to work it through, and these folks never wanted to resolve the conflict, so we moved on. Sometimes you have to do that. Speaking of that, there are five general conflict resolution techniques. The first is to withdraw or avoid. So basically, you have a conflict and you just avoid it. You just go into your own and you don't engage. That's really a problem. Okay. Next isn't much better. That's smoothing or accommodating the other. So this is a situation where you're having a conflict and you sort of roll over and let the other steamroll you a little bit. That's smoothing and accommodating. Compromising and reconciling, that's pretty good. It's just you're not really having a win-win situation, which is where you want to be. Somebody's giving something up in a compromise reconcile situation. And you don't ever want to have people have to give anything up. Or maybe both sides have to give a little, but not one versus the other, because then they feel like, well, I lost that. And then it's not great. It's not great for good working relationships or motivation. Force direct, well, that, as I've said earlier, that's a thing of the past. Sometimes you have to do it though. Sometimes as a leader to move things forward, you have to do a force direct. It's just not optimal. Now, collaboration and problem solving, achieving a win-win, or otherwise known as, or also known as a win-win, that's really the way to go. Whenever you can collaborate or solve the problem, it's better than these other approaches. But I'm going to say it again. To do this effectively, this conflict management, you have to confront the issue unambiguously.